right. Well, I just wanted to say what an honor it is to be able to introduce Hugh today, because 40 years ago, in 1980, Hugh introduced me to the Baha'i faith. And he also introduced me to Richard St. Barbe Baker. So now my whole family are Baha'i, and I'm pioneering in various countries, planting trees everywhere. And I quit my job after meeting Richard St. Barbe Baker and went back to university and got a forestry degree. So it's just amazing to be back in touch with Hugh after all these years of having had such an influence on my life and my family's life. So anyway, to let you know, he's the president, and Hugh Locke is the president and co-founder of the Smallholder Farmers Alliance, which is a nonprofit working with small-scale family farmers to help feed and reforest renewed Haiti. He's the author of a book called The Haiti Experiment. He's a writer and lecturer on smallholding farming and sustainable development. His earlier career included being a director of the Office of Public Affairs at the Baha'i International Community in New York, and he was mentored by the forester and environmentalist Richard St. Barbe Baker, who lived from 1889 to 1982. And he's also he takes care of the Baker archives at the University of Saskatchewan and serves as as the literary trustee of those archives were not published. So anyway, it's a great pleasure and honor to introduce you, and I thank you so much for my wonderful life. Thank you.
So I'm going to, if I may now, share my screen. Let's see if this technology works as promised. Is that showing up?
Yes, we see it. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Janet. It brings back so many memories, just even describing those early years. And so I'm going to give you an overall presentation about the work that we're doing in Haiti, but I do want to start off with a reference to St. Barbe Baker. As Janet mentioned, he was a forester and environmentalist, also a Baha'i, which is how I came in contact with him. And I met him in 1976. I was a student, and I was absolutely enchanted by this great larger-than-life character. And I offered to assist him because he was 88 when I met him. And I was going to be going to school in England the year after I met him. So we met up in England, and that summer I traveled with him as he went around the country. And then I made an audacious proposal that I would like to assist him to organize the remaining years of his life. And he lived until he was 90, in his 93rd year. So I helped him organize world tours each year. He lived with me for part of each year in London when he wasn't based at his home in New Zealand, where he and his wife lived. And I also helped to organize all of his papers, which were scattered all over the place in people's attics and garages, so that when he passed, I was able to collect all of that material and offer it to the University of Saskatchewan, because that's where St. Barbe, although he was born and raised in England, he ended up as a young man in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, going to the university, and was in the first graduating class in 1910. And ironically, my family helped to found the university, so it was an interesting connection, which we didn't quite know about till after we'd been together for a while. So I met St. Barbe, and he was my mentor and really planted this seed about forestry, something which I didn't fully grasp the importance of until many years later. But one of the seminal moments in St. Barbe's career was when he was assistant conservator of forests in Kenya. And this photograph is from 1922. Part of what made St. Barbe so extraordinary was that he understood that if you want to engage people in either tree planting or environmental protection, or being earth stewards, however you want to frame that, that it's absolutely essential to find a route into the cultural DNA of the people that you're engaged with. And so he met these smallholder farmers in Kenya, the Kikuyu, and they were cutting down a lot of trees, clear felling for agricultural purposes, but not replanting trees. And so he approached them and said, would you be interested in planting trees? They said, no, that's not our business. In fact, they said that's I think, I can't remember the reference, but they basically said that's God's business. But he realized that for every significant agricultural activity in the life, in the annual cycle of farming in Kenya, there was a dance. There was a dance to plant the crops, a dance to harvest the crops. So he proposed a dance of the trees. And through this, he was able to engage this very large extended population of Kikuyu in tree planting. And he named the group the Men of the Trees. And initially it was men because they were all warriors like the ones you see here, and that guy holding his tree. And they all pledged to plant 10 trees a year, care for trees, and there were a few other elements to the pledge. And just because I can't resist little bits of historic trivia, one of the two guests at this event in Kenya in 1922 was the Italian ambassador, who then passed a note on to Mussolini, who subsequently invited St. Barb to Rome because he thought whoever could organize this with local people in Kenya would be a very good person to have on board for his nefarious reasons. St. Barb declined the invitation, but it was just interesting to see who took notice of what he was doing at that time. So we now zoom into Haiti. I originally went to Haiti in 2005, and I was a co-founder of a humanitarian organization which didn't really have anything to do with trees. It was a broader program dealing with education and sports, and eventually helping with the aftermath of the earthquake in 2010. But in the course of being there, you can't help but realize that this is one of the places in the world that most needs trees. So St. Barb's voice was at the back of my mind the whole time I was there from 2005 onwards working, because you just can't avoid the impact of deforestation. And I subsequently met Timothée Georges, a Haitian-trained agronomist, and the, sorry, I was just looking at something that came up on the screen. So Timothée and I were both very fixated on tree planting. And so I left the organization I had been co-founder of, and Timothée and I decided to create something called the Smallholder Farmers Alliance. And our goal was to plant trees. Now, first thing we did was to set out to find a sponsor. So I happened to know the then CEO of the Timberland Company. So I approached them. I said, your logo's a tree. They happened at the time to have a large factory in the Dominican Republic next door to Haiti. And as you can tell from the background photograph, the Dominican Republic side does not need trees, whereas the other half of the island does. So I said, would you be our sponsor? And so he said, yes, we'd love that. So Timothée and I then began to approach the only people who were able to plant trees in rural areas of Haiti, and that's smallholder farmers. This couple is named Gustave and Rosemary. And Timothée and I went around the country and we approached smallholder farmers, and we were very excited, and we were absolutely certain they were going to be delighted with our proposal. And we said, we're going to grow trees in nurseries and we're going to give them to you Isn't that wonderful? And all you have to do is plant them. And we were quite shocked when they said, no, they had absolutely no interest. Wait, okay, well then we'll pay you to plant the trees. We thought that would do it. But then our sponsor said, no, you can't use our money to pay them to plant the trees, because if you do that, what happens when we stop sponsoring it? So then we had to go back to the drawing board, Timote and I. And we then went around again and spoke to a lot of the smallholder farmers and asked them, what do you need that you don't have now? And the consensus was that there were three things they really needed. They needed higher quality seed for their crops. This is open pollinated, non-hybrid, good quality seed so they would get higher yields. But these seeds were very expensive, hard to get. The second thing they needed was hand tools to work their fields. And the third thing that they really wanted was basic agricultural training. Most smallholder farmers in Haiti had been cut off from agricultural training for about 60 years. They had just been left on their own, abandoned, which is the case with smallholder farmers throughout the developing world, but that was particularly true in Haiti. So we said, okay, if you would volunteer, we said this to the farmers, if you would volunteer to grow, transplant, and look after trees that would then turn into credits, which you could exchange for those three things you said you wanted: good quality seed, hand tools, and basic training. And we said, is that a workable deal? And so we had a very enthusiastic response, and that began the Smallholder Farmers Alliance, and this was in 2010. So the nurseries we set up, they're all very simple nurseries, no electricity, no running water, completely off the grid. And the idea was that we had to set up several nurseries because we started off with a couple of hundred farmers, and every farmer had to be close enough to a nursery to be able to walk there, because there's no good in setting something like this up if you're not going to make it possible for farmers to easily access it, and they certainly don't have vehicles to travel around. So we initially had, starting in 2010, we had a couple of hundred farmers, then we had 1,000, then we had more than 1,000, then the whole thing started to grow, and we ended up with many thousands of farmers participating. And over the course of the several years, we began fairly extensive tree planting programs. So the trees got planted as living fences, as stabilization along riverbeds. This particular photo is near the city of Gonaïves, and the lower third are all trees that we had planted with farmers there. And in fact, this is an area where we've got several blocks of trees, and we hope in the next coming years that they will kind of begin to connect and form the first green belt of its kind in Haiti. So the basic premise then, just to review, was that we said to the farmers, you volunteer to run these nurseries. It's all under your direction. And you do all the labor. That earns you the three basic things. And that was going well until we began to get petitions from our farmers. And they said, we understand this tree currency, this idea of credits that we're earning, but could we possibly get a few additional services? They never ask for money, but very respectfully, they would say, could we possibly, we had a delegation of women farmers, and they said, could we possibly have loans, microcredit loans, because we want to set up little side businesses to supplement our farm income. So we made this exclusively for women. It's one of our most successful programs. And women who get access to the microcredit loans because they are involved in the tree planting part But once they become part of the microcredit program as well, they get loans of between $50 to $500 US equivalent, and they repay those over 6 months. We now have hundreds of clients, and we have, it's either 100% repayment rate, or there might have been maybe 2 over the last years. But it's an incredibly successful program. And the interesting thing is that it's managed by women farmers. We have one paid staff person. All the rest of the people who are involved in deciding on who gets the loans and monitoring the repayments and all of that are all women farmers. Then we realized that on the seed side, and initially when the farmers were earning their seeds, we would buy that from a market, bring it in and provide it to the farmers. But as the quality of the agriculture improved, we were then able to use the seed that they would return at the end of each season, because the basic structure is they earn their seed, plant it, and then at harvest, they return the same amount of seed, or 10% extra if it's been a good year. Once that seed quality became sufficient that we could then use it as part of the coming season's distribution, then suddenly we have a seed bank. And now in the places where it's firmly established, the seed bank runs without any external funding. It's all from seeds harvested and shared by farmers, with quality control built in by a farm committee that oversees the operation. Then we had a petition, could we get involved in livestock? And so this became a very interesting program, not unique to us. And I would say, be careful to say seed banks are not unique to us, neither is microcredit. These are just all things that came naturally with petitions from farmers asking for additional services. And so the livestock program, it starts when the community gets together and they decide who is going to get the first, in this case, it was a bunch of goats. I think there were 18 goats. Anyway, the community decides who's going to get the first goats. But the farmers who receive those goats, they don't own them until they've had 2 offspring that have gone to other members in the community. So the entire community gets involved in making sure everybody's goats are healthy, because they're all in line to receive subsequent goats. The only ongoing cost to this, once it's set in motion, is an annual visit by a veterinarian, which we sponsor. We have one such program like this that we started in 2011 with cows in an area near a city called Gonaive. And that program has been running continuously since 2011 without any additional input from us. And I believe we've now had 25 cows have been the offspring from the original group. Now, in terms of statistics, what's the impact of this on participating farmers? So they're planting these trees, and ultimately the average yield increase, because they're getting higher quality seed, plus the training, plus the tools. So the average increase in terms of farm yields is around 40%, but often it's more. And the average income increase ranges from 50 to 100%. This is a combination of higher yields, but also lower input costs, because they're earning the seed, tools, and training required. Now, again, just in terms of what this looks like by way of statistics, so we have now 6,000 farmers on 3,000 farms, and that number differential is because we accept husband and wife as separate but equal members when they farm together. That was a fairly revolutionary concept when we announced it in 2010, and we weren't the only farm group to do this, but we were certainly one of the first in Haiti to have women and men as separate members. But it set a kind of precedent. So all of the activities are undertaken jointly by men and women, and there's a lot of care taken to make sure that women and men are balanced on all of the committees and activities that take place. We currently have 29 nurseries spread out through 7 different locations around the country. And again, the reason for so many nurseries is as soon as we've got a new group of farmers in one area, we have to set up a nursery that's close enough for them to walk to. And the net out of all of this is that we've planted more than 8 million trees to date, all planted by the participating farmers. Back to this photo from 1922. And again, just to recall this particular insight of Richard St. Barbe Baker, that if you want to change behavior with regard to tree planting, environmental protection, earth stewardship, you need to find a way into the culture, and it needs to be participatory. You cannot simply come in and superimpose your ideas. And the way this translates is that every single action of the Smallholder Farmers Alliance at a local level is the result of consultation. In this particular case, this young man is talking to a group of farmers. Sue would be able to correct me on this. I think this is in Medor, and he's talking about the plans to set up a new farm depot, because we're trying to set up these depots to be able to provide smallholder farmers with access to additional seed that they might need and farm supplies and tools. And so nothing is done without consultation and a sense of community endorsement of any action that they are then going to be implementing themselves. But we want to make sure that it has that strong community-based anchor. And the reason that I particularly look at what we're doing as a spiritual process, I'm a Baha'i and I draw on my Baha'i faith. My colleague Timote is a Christian and he draws on his Christian faith. But just to share this one quote from the son of the founder of the Baha'i faith, who assumed leadership in 1892, Abdul Baha, that the fundamental basis of community is agriculture. And we're continually experimenting to figure out how that works, you know. So I wanted to share 3 new projects, just to give you a sense of some of the other activities that we're involved in. And the first one involves our initial corporate sponsor, Timberland. After a few years of operation, Timberland came to us and said, we're going to continue to sponsor you to plant trees. We love that, it's all working well. But couldn't we become a client? We said, well, we don't really have anything that we're growing now that we could sell you. And they said, well, we understood that Haiti's very good for cotton growing. And we said, well, you know, that's true enough, except there's been no cotton grown in Haiti for 30 years. And so they said, well, if you brought it back, we would love to buy from you. So we then had to do a feasibility study, and we reached out to a man. You can see that a man with his arms crossed in the background there. His name is Remilo Leveille. And this is a picture from 1956, when he had just introduced some new Brazilian cotton varieties to Haiti. Open pollinated, everything we do is organic, so we would never consider anything that was a hybrid. But anyway, he was considered the father of cotton in Haiti. And so we approached him and said, would he guide us? And there he is on the far right. And this photograph is taken about a mile from that previous photo in 1956, when he was growing cotton. And so this is the planting of the first seeds for cotton trials, because we had to, you know, find seed from India, the United States, some from Brazil, and older seeds from left over in Haiti to figure out what was going to work climatically. Because cotton left Haiti not because of climate, but because of politics. So we then went through a process to find the best seeds, and with Remulot's guidance, he's now 94. And you see my colleague Timothy and I in the middle, and we've become his honorary sons to help carry out his legacy of cotton. Because he had 3 daughters, and none of them decided to go into agriculture. So we volunteered to be the honorary sons. It's a lovely man. And so then we began to cultivate cotton, all again grown organically. And it was been a big learning curve for us, because you start off from zero and you have to figure out all the different aspects of it. And we had to bring in a ginning operation. We had to figure out how to bale the stuff. Then we shipped it off to the United States, and Timberland turned it into organic cotton canvas. And the first shoes are available today online at Timberland, made with Haitian cotton. And so we feel it's going to be making a major contribution to the agricultural future of Haiti. And everybody who is involved in the entire operation of the Smallholder Farmers Alliance, it all starts with tree planting. And I've been mentioning the name of Timberland a lot, but I do want to just give a shout out to all the other groups that help to support us, because it's a very diverse group. And we're incredibly grateful to all of their participation. So now, the second new initiative I wanted to mention has to do with data. In the early 1960s, different people will debate when this actually began to happen. But when you think about the emergence of industrial scale agriculture in the late 1950s through the 1960s, early 70s, large scale monoculture, industrial scale farming. And there was an assumption that small scale farmers, smallholder farmers, which by definition is 2 hectares or less, that translates to roughly 5 acres, that those smallholder farmers, most of whom were in the developing world, that they were going to disappear with the emergence of large-scale industrial agriculture. And that did not happen. There are still 500 million smallholder farms throughout the developing world. But because there was this assumption that commercial agriculture should take over growing all food, smallholder farmers were cut out from research, from support from universities, support from governments. They were cut out from negotiations of trade regulations, all of the different parts of our global community that affect agriculture. They were essentially made invisible. And one of the things we realized is that we could leapfrog over the absence of data for smallholder farmers and go right to a new form of data management for smallholder farmers. And so we have, working with Columbia University over a period of 3 years, and now in partnership with a Silicon Valley group called the Lydian Group, we have come up with a new kind of data app and platform that allows the precise measurement of tree planting, food growing, and cotton growing by smallholder farmers. And the reason this is important is that for the first time, we're going to be able to, and we're doing the pilot test this summer in Haiti, we're going to be able to measure per farm and per crop, what's the value to that farmer? We call it smallholder resilience but basically, how are they doing? Are they making enough to get by, you know? And what does that actually look like in real hard numbers? The second thing is, what's the impact of that particular farm and that particular crop on contributing to food security, on climate change, and very importantly, on gender equality? The question as to how all this works is part of the challenge. And I won't go into it now, but you know, for example, gender equality, it's based on informal indicators that are internationally agreed upon as reflecting changes in gender equality in smallholder households. That's maybe too technical, but it's exciting to think that you can have this level of detail about a simple smallholder farm that might be, you know, 5 acres, let's say. But what begins to make it very important is the kind of applications for this information, this data that we're gathering. So first of all, we're going to be able to determine whether a crop has been grown using organic and regenerative standards. For those of you who are not familiar with this, everybody knows what organic means. But what's interesting is that organic essentially means that you are measuring the absence of the bad things. And regenerative goes several steps beyond to measure the presence of positive indicators in terms of the health of the soil, but also the health of the farmers and the communities and families. So this is the direction that many in the agricultural world are moving towards, is not just organic, but the next step towards regenerative. And being able to measure that is a very important component of being able to, for example, sell cotton that can be labeled as regenerative. And then the second part is using the system that we've developed in partnership with Columbia University, the Lydian Group, and Timberland. We're going to be able to pay an individual farmer. You see that little farm card down below. Each of our farmers is going to be receiving a unique digital ID that you scan using that QR code there. And whoever is purchasing from the farmer can make individual payments to them for the data that they're providing on their crop with regard to its positioning as either organic and or regenerative. But the real innovation here is that data for a smallholder farmer now becomes an additional product from their farm. And that's an absolutely revolutionary concept throughout the developing world. Then the next one is being able to measure the trees and be able to quantify them in terms of carbon sequestration. So this means that every tree is being registered, not only the tree itself, the variety of the tree, the condition of the land, is it irrigated or non-irrigated, is it public land, is it private? Then it's also linked to geospatial mapping so that all of this can be monitored over time. And then the farm card is what allows each farmer to have their own financial instrument, as we say. Think of it as like a specialized credit card. So when they grow the trees in the nurseries, the tree credits now are going to be entered into a farm card. When they sell cotton, that's going to register onto their card as a cash payment. And then at the designated farm depots we're building, they can use the card either to draw out in cash or to buy things using a combination of credits and cash. And all of this gives them a completely new level of independence and capacity. And as you can tell, I'm rather excited about this, and I could go on, but I think I will just skip over all of the wonderful details that I could share with you and go to the third new innovation that I wanted to share with you, because again, remembering back to Richard St. Barr Baker, and how do you connect with people? I mean, this is anywhere, it's North America, it's Europe. How do you engage people to become stewards of the earth? Well, at one level, it starts with kids. And so we have been working with a young Haitian comic book artist named Tony Louis, and he came up with a character named Tanema. And Tanema, as you can see, is a badass black super shero. We have to get the category correct. And she has three missions. One is to plant trees, the second is to support smallholder farmers, and the third is to achieve gender equality. And that's the message that she's taking to kids in Haiti. And it is a comic book, so it's filled with good guys and bad guys and all sorts of shenanigans and who's doing what. But the bottom line is it's helping to engage a new generation of kids in Haiti to understand the role of trees, to respect smallholder farming, and to understand the importance of gender equality, starting in their homes, but also in terms of how it affects agriculture and the future of the country. Now, I positioned all of this as lessons from the smallholder farming revolution in Haiti. So I want to just conclude with the following. If you step back and look at the global picture, so there are 7.6 billion of us sharing planet Earth. Within that, there are 500 million smallholder farms. Now, some people will say it's 450 million, some people say it's 525 million. The most usually agreed upon index right now, which is generated by the United Nations, is 500 million smallholder farms. So again, that's farms that are no more than 5 acres in total, and that's throughout the developing world. When we say smallholders, even though there are smallholders in, let's say, North America and Europe, it's a completely different kind of smallholder operation. So in this context, we're saying 500 million smallholder farms throughout the developing world. Excuse me. Now, if you add up the farmers and their families on those 500 million smallholder farms, you realize that there are 2.5 billion people who derive their livelihood from smallholder agriculture. That in turn represents a third of humanity. And as I mentioned before, they have largely been made invisible for the last 60 years. And so we are not by any means the only group doing this, but we are one of the groups that is beginning to look at how do you engage smallholder farmers and help them become more effective at growing food, at combating climate change, at addressing food security issues, and achieving gender equality. And if you can imagine 2.5 billion people who have previously been outside the mainstream, if we were able to bring them into the mainstream, give them the tools they need to become part of a massive army engaged in helping us to combat these huge crises that we are facing in wave after wave, whether it's climate change or gender equality, or even mass migration from rural areas. We need to be able to figure out how to work with small-scale family farmers in a way that takes them from marginalized to becoming an effective part of the global economy, but still in their own terms, and still doing it in a way that recognizes that you start with communities. And everything comes from there and escalates outwards. So I just wanted to end with two quotes that I particularly find important in being able to do the work I'm doing. The first is from the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah, that the earth is but one country and mankind its citizens. And I put it to you that if you, regardless of what faith tradition you are, and it just happens that I'm a Baha'i, so this is what I draw on, but if you accept that we are one human family, then the 2.5 billion people who have been marginalized within the family need to be brought back in. And I feel that the second quote then creates the framework for doing that. And that is the quote from Abdu'l-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, who said the fundamental basis of community is agriculture. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Bravo.
I think we're all clapping and twinkling and whatever. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Well, and again, a premise, I couldn't do any of this if it wasn't for my colleague, Timothée Georges, because I may be the one who can, you know, spout off a lot, but it's a joint effort, and I have learned so much from Timothée, who is the kindest, most, and the calmest person you can imagine under very stressful circumstances in Haiti at the moment.
Much, Hugh. I'm here with Judith Bakiria, who's a smallholder farmer revolutionist herself.
There's some very brilliant revolutionary ideas you've got going on here.
Thank you.
I think it's so significant that this is happening in Haiti, who has, an area that has just really riveted the attention of the world for its many problems, but may now become a real landmark of progress in this restorative agriculture and in the recognition of the smallholder.
Well, and it's also important to take that into consideration, as you said, David, because the situation in Haiti is just a mess. You know, the security situation, the political situation, economics, environmental, it is a very challenging place to work. But because this is based in smallholder farming communities that are outside the cities, and it's not that they are not touched by the goings on, you know, right now, a lot of security instability. At the same time, because it's owned, managed, and operated by smallholder farmers at a rural level, that's what keeps it going. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't be in operation at all.
And Dawn, how are we doing? Are we doing Q&A now, or how do we want to do this? I see lots of folks with interest. So how long do we have? We're going till 2 or longer? I don't know how long we have Hugh for.
Usually, well, we'd love to have Hugh for as long as he'd like to stay, but usually we try to keep it to 90 minutes. So I would say 2:30 would be the end, the absolute end. But right now, yes, we'd love to have if there are questions, if you could, if people know how to raise their hands.
Right, so to raise your hand in the lower right where it says reactions, if you click on reactions, then you can raise your hand. And what that helps us, because you pop to the front top left of the queue, and that way Hugh could call on you, or that way it works a little better. So if you can't, you can direct message me or Dawn, and we'll make sure that you get in the queue also.
So Ricardo was quick to use the technology, so his hand is up. But how do you unmute him? Can you do that?
I can unmute.
Oh, there you are.
I can unmute myself.
There you go.
I'm really sorry if you can hear my children in the background. Hugh, it's always a pleasure to listen to you. Just a couple of comments. The original pledge from Richardson Bar Bakery was plant 10 trees a year, take care of trees everywhere, and make a good deed every day. So those were the three elements. Second, I kind of feel jealous that I think you represent in some ways better the original ideas of Riches and Barbecue than we do sometimes. And I really appreciate like all the work you're doing. Without agriculture and without the people at the center, it's clear that we're not going to be able to preserve trees or to plant trees or to grow trees at the end of the day. You know, I'm really interested to pilot the data. I have told you before, and please take us into account. And the last little comment is, I know size is a really good proxy for smallholders, and in most cases stick, but in some other cases it doesn't. Sometimes you have large farms in surface, but that they're not technified or they're rain-fed. And like in Tlaxcala, Mexico, you have 20, 30 hectares like farms that are really below poverty. And then you have farms with 3 or 4 hectares really technified and exporting berries in other parts of the country that, that are really successful. So it is a really good proxy, but sometimes in certain circumstances, there are some outliers. And it's always a pleasure to listen to you. I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I mean, before we go, just tell us where you're from, because I don't think everybody knows what ITF means.
Oh, sorry, International Tree Foundation, originally Men of the Trees, the organization founded by Riches and Baker in 1922 in Kenya. We are based in Oxford, the UK, currently operating in 8 African countries, the UK and Ireland. And Stephen Bickers is the chair of the board, and he's here.
Just to respond to the last comment in particular, Ricardo, basically everything we do starts off with an experiment, because Timothy and I did not set out with a very grand plan. We just wanted to approach a bunch of farmers, see if they plant trees. And we didn't realize that we had entered into a space where we had to create a kind of extended ecosystem in order to be able to work with farmers. And honestly, we didn't do it for any other reason than it seemed to be the only way to plant the trees. But the agricultural side kept getting bigger. And we saw the need for it. And then what's very interesting is that, again, we didn't plan this, but what's begun to happen is that because we have a strict rule that politics can never be part of what we do, anybody who runs for office is automatically expelled from the smallholder farmers' lands. I know somebody has to be a politician, it's just not ours. And so the result is that the tree nurseries, again, every single tree nursery has no electricity, no running water, is completely off the grid. And yet the tree nurseries have become de facto community centers. So people come there to find out what's going on in the community. A little scary, they've begun to bring their disputes to the nurseries and ask that the farmers, the farm leaders arbitrate. Normally something that's done by elected people. We're being careful about that. We don't want to create any enemies. But the most important thing is that everything we do starts off with an experiment, because we honestly don't have any experience in these things. Each one we take on, we just try and figure it out. I didn't even know what an app was. I had to look up, what does app, I'm going to be 67 this year, so it didn't come with the gene package. So we just reach out, find out who's doing things, experiment, and that's the only way it works. And I think it also represents an advantage that we don't have an agenda other than trying to figure out how to help smallholder farmers. And so we can do anything. You just have to go out, raise the money. Thankfully, I'm not so bad at that. and so we're able to then take on these experiments, and some of them are absolutely groundbreaking. There's more that I could tell you about that we're just beginning to work on now in terms of large-scale procurement from smallholder farmers to be able to have them sell to large-scale food distribution groups. Anyway, I won't go into that, but it's a continuing experiment. But thank you for your comments, Ricardo. And yes, I will be in touch separately about the app.
Great. So next up on our queue is Stephen Vickers, and then we have Kayanga, and then Sandy, and then it looks like David and Rennie and David Van Vliet are up. So let's go to Stephen Vickers, please.
Hi, Steve, also from ITF, as Hugh knows. I'm absolutely full of admiration for everything that you and Timot have achieved, and I just think it's utterly wonderful. And there's a couple of questions, Hugh, I'd really like to explore. What percentage of the smallholder farmers, as you have defined them, in Haiti do you currently cover? And if you were to attract most of them, would you still be able to find markets for your high value crops like cotton and other things that presumably you have added, alfalfa or whatever, which will have raised the income of the farmers? That's one question. The second question is, how do you address the energy issues of Haiti? I know that from one of your other presentations that charcoal is the big source of income. You are planting trees. Are you going to have to coppice trees and sell the charcoal in order to maintain public support? And the third area was, no, that's good enough for the moment.
Well, to answer your first question, we currently work with 3,000 farms, and there are approximately 500,000 farms in Haiti.
Oh, wow.
What Timothy and I have pledged to do is to work ourselves out of a job. We would like to see that the Smallholder Farmers Alliance becomes a movement that we eventually lose all control of. That's a bit scary because it could go in a weird direction, but unless it is beyond us, as long as we've tried the best we can to instill the right core values, it should become something other than an NGO-driven organization. So that's our goal. I want to be out of a job in 5 or 10 years. And that's, I mean, I'm being serious. I'm not being facetious. That is the only way something like this can operate. We are trying to create as many of the component parts as we can. Like, for example, the seed banks. Again, seed banks have been around for millennia, and other people are doing them in Haiti, other people are doing them throughout the developing world. But figuring out how to make it work at a community level when it is farmer managed, and how to, you have to really work at being able to monitor the quality of the seed. So each season, for example, before you hand out the seed, you have to do a germination test. Because what if you hand out dud corn? You know, you'd be losing your constituency. You have to build in all these things. They're not complicated, but that has to become a part of the core culture of how the farmers approach these things. So that's, we're trying to inculcate that at the moment. Second question with regard to charcoal. One of the reasons that trees are cut down in such a random manner in Haiti is because they do not have an inherent value. So as soon as you make trees, tree planting and looking after trees the basis of a value proposition, where that tree is worth more in the ground than cut for charcoal, then you've established your first threshold level of protection. Secondly, you have to plant trees that are specifically for cutting down for charcoal, so that they're coppiced and they grow again from the root. And that's not every tree. And so you need to be thinking in terms of managed woodlots. And then the third element is that once trees have a value in that larger community, farmers and their families have options as to how they cut for their own use for cooking. Because it's unrealistic to think that they're going to use solar. I'm sorry, I would love that, but I have never seen an effective solar cooking operation that's realistic for a rural farm family. I know. I'm probably going to get emails from people who have suggestions. I will consider anything, but honestly, you have to prove it to me because I'm very skeptical. Sorry, sidebar. Once in a community, there is a collective sense of the value of trees. Then the farmers have options to cut the side branches of trees for cooking, and they learn not to just randomly cut the trees down. So it's a multifaceted approach. At some point, I'd love to get involved in larger scale application of solar and other forms of energy, but that's a little farther down the road.
Great. Our next.
Sorry, by the way, just while to pick up on the thread of the International Tree Foundation, next year, 2022, is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Men of the Trees, which is now known as the International Tree Foundation. So we're going to be reaching back out to everybody to help us observe that year, because the message of St. Barb Baker, which is most adequately summarized in Paul Hanley's amazing book, The Men of the Trees. If you Google that, Men of the Trees, Paul Hanley, buy the book. It's a wonderful biography, recently published. But St. Barb's message needs to get out there to a wider audience, because so much of what we're looking at right now as to how to approach these issues on a global scale, hello, St. Barb did a lot of this groundbreaking work. For example, he is the one who conceived originally of the idea of the Great Green Wall in Africa, which is now being implemented as the largest single environmental collaborative project on Earth, establishing a green belt of trees from one side of Africa to the other. That was an idea that St. Barb originally had in the early 1950s and worked extensively on it. The way it's being implemented now, I wouldn't say is a direct correlation to his original work, but nonetheless, he was the one who originally thought of that and mapped it out.
Wonderful.
Thank you for pointing that out. That's great.
Wonderful synergies. So next in the queue, apologize if I say your name wrong, is Kayanga?
Yes.
Thank you.
Kayanga, yes. Yeah, no, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I think I am so moved. And this is, I think, one of the best examples that I can live with and think about how I can help the community moving forward. I live in a very rural area, and as you say, the presenter is the first thing that really attracted me in coming back home from Canada after over 20 years to come and settle in a very rural area was the fundamental basis for the community, which was agriculture. So I came and helped found an agricultural educational learning center where farmers come to class every day and learn agriculture and go back to their homes and improve food production, food security, and all that. But I think one of the things that I feel now that I left out was the tree planting. We've had a couple of tree planting events, and for a couple of years, we planted trees where we've invited the farmers to come and be part of it and take at least 10 seedlings home and plant and look after it and all that. But I think today I'm walking out of this meeting with this new perspective, because 2021 was one of the years that I've been looking for a way to really incorporate tree planting into the agricultural section of the farmers. And I'm very happy that I've learned this tonight. And I will maybe inbox you on the side. So maybe you can take me under your arm so you can maybe I can have some questions on how I can approach this. And now that I've come back into the community.
Well, and I would, I'm not sure if you got cut off there.
In the village to settle, like to move forward that way and get some guidance on how I can really bring tree planting into the agricultural aspect that we've already started. We already have a center that is going on in a very rural area that is really connecting with the community, and now just bringing this aspect will be a great deal, and then follow through with some of the things that you've shared tonight that might be able to give us some guidance on how to measure the successes and what to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And you know, Gary is on here, and we were just talking the other day, and Gary is reaching out to various Baha'i-led initiatives in different parts of the world to begin to look at what are the best practices where Baha'is are working with smallholder farmers, whether that's in, you know, tree planting or more general agricultural programs. And I would really like to see the emergence of some kind of network where we can be sharing, you know, ideas, and because this is the time when we need to really be open to innovating in whatever way is going to work, you know? And so I really look forward to that. So you'll send me your email. Oh, there it is. Okay. Thank you.
I will. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a good segue, because Sandy was also saying, oh, I'd love to connect with you. So Sandy, I don't know if you want to speak also. And I'm seeing that we're having more folks in the queue than we're probably going to get through. So I'm encouraging folks to drop your questions in the chat. And for example, there's another question coming up. It looks like we have Tony Louie, who is the artist for your cartoon. So there's a question for them also. So let's see what we can get through. Tony, people want to know about the receptivity of the youth to the message. So keep that in mind, and we'll get to that hopefully. We'd love to hear from you. So Sandy, yes, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. I first would really like to thank you for this inspiring presentation as well. And really my question was, how can we continue to communicate? Our project in Lesotho has several aspects that are different. And we also did initiate something in Haiti through the Anizinuzi school quite a few years ago. So it would really be great to continue food security. And we're also trying to work with people who are not already farmers, which is an added challenge. And they in community decided to purchase or build food dryers, which was a new way that they could take advantage of vegetables and fruits that were available. So yes, I would like to also connect with you.
Sure. Well, and I've heard of some interesting technologies that use passive solar for food drying. And I may not be a fan of solar for cooking, but I think for food drying, it has a lot of applications because it's very sensible, you know?
Thank you. I think that initiating something in the community, the project manager wrote to me this week saying that after we had spoken about this, she found someone in the community who is already doing this, isn't going to teach them how to do something. So I think that once it's started, they will take it and go forward.
Well, and being able to have a way that we can share this information. I know personally, I don't have the bandwidth to do it, but I know that there are others. And Gary, if you're still on.
Gary Royce, yep, he's waving there, yep.
Okay, Gary, I'm putting you on the spot, sorry.
I'm still on, it's fine. Just, I mean, what we talked about is what we're going on now. I mean, you're not the only person, you know, in the world that's doing this, but I think it's an important activity for Baha'is. So I think those people who are, I mean, I don't really want to do it in terms of theory. I would like to see the practice, you know, people, what are they doing? How is it working? And share that with other people. And then we can learn from each other. That's the main thing. Case studies, if you will.
Yeah. Great. I'm all on board.
Great. We'd love our organization to coordinate something like that.
Sandy, you're breaking up. It's a little hard. Do you want to turn off your video and try again so we could hear what you said?
Okay. No, I just said that I would love for our organization to be involved in coordinating that different knowledge and action.
Wonderful. Yes, I see something emerging here. Very exciting. Let's go over to David and Rennie Lee.
Hi, I'm so interested in this. We just discovered Richard St. Barb Baker about 5 years ago. I think we've got about 20 of his books now.
Fantastic.
We were so happy to see the book by Paul Hanley.
Yes.
So complete and fills in so many gaps. But I'm wondering, now I'm giving a talk about Islam and the Renaissance. And one of the topics that I will really focus in on is the desertification of the Middle East, that it took them about 3,000, 4,000 years to do that. We're outstripping them now, on, extremely. And but it was all because of the discovery of bronze. For North America had no surface tin deposits, therefore Native Americans, North and South, could never have discovered bronze. So that's why their forests were left. That's why we had those great forests to supply Europe. And that's why Europe gained on the Middle East, because they were late in getting the bronze and steel. My question, I just have two. If anyone out there knows, I heard from an army officer in Heidelberg, Germany, when I was there, that there was a caliph in the Ottoman Empire who, when after 1500 the empire began to fall apart, he found there was nothing to tax anymore. Everyone was so impoverished. So he began taxing the trees. If anyone can tell me who that caliph.
Never heard of that, but
well, he seemed very certain of his facts. But my other question is, what were the trees that were so often shown in the pictures? They looked like mimosa, looked like a leguminous nitrogen fixing tree. I'd be very interested to know the ones that you found appropriate to Haiti.
we have 21 trees that are available to the farmers. So there are two tree seasons a year. And so in advance of each season, the farmers gather and they have to decide what trees they want to plant, because they have to identify where they're going to be planted and who's going to look after them. And so they choose from those 21 different varieties. So if they're beginning to stabilize a slope behind the community where water's been rushing down for generations because there's no trees there and it all just collects in the community. So that, as an example, they would start off with what's called a flamboyant tree. And it's a very hardy tree. You can plant it where there's nothing, there's rocks and a bit of grass. You can stick in the flamboyant, and that's a good starter. And then over time, you figure out what are the next trees that you plant in succession to be able to then have a mixed stand of trees that's going to more accurately represent a regular kind of forest, depending on what your need is. If you want to plant a living fence, because it's very difficult to demarcate between fields from different farmers, and they can't afford barbed wire or regular fencing, so they plant a combination of jatropha and moringa, and you interweave the branches, and then you end up with a fence, not tree size, but it works out to become a very effective fence. You may want to do an agroforestry approach where you're going to have papaya trees in the middle of a bean field. Papaya is good in that regard because it's very, very tall, and then a little poof at the top with its fruit, and it doesn't throw much shade. And it happens to coexist well with beans. So it depends on the setting, but that's the bottom line is the farmers choose which trees they want to grow out of a list of 21 that are either native to Haiti or they have been sufficiently adapted that they're considered the equivalent of a natural species. For example, breadfruit, breadfruit came with the early colonialists, it wasn't resident in Haiti, but it's completely naturalized. So anyway, that's maybe too much detail, but that's what we look at in terms of selection. Thanks.
Fantastic. Next is David Van Vliet, and then we have Tim Locke, and then I think we should get that question in for our artist
Tony.
who's with us.
Tony, yes.
Yes.
Hi, Hugh. Calling from Winnipeg, Manitoba. You talked about regenerative, and I was just wondering if anyone's considering the next step to a larger vision in terms of landscape structure. You referred to kind of the beginnings of a green belt. I know you're working in 7 different locations and just, you know, a portion of all the farmers, 3,000 farmers. But you know, if you're thinking about ecosystem function and landscape scale impact, is there any thinking about how to a future vision to expand this workforce and capacity?
Well, we are beginning to work with a group called Terra Genesis. If you're familiar with regenerative agriculture, there are 2 main groups that are helping to define the emerging category of regenerative. One is the Rodale Institute, and the other is Terra Genesis. And Terra Genesis is particularly interesting to us because they are looking at regenerative as a landscape scale engagement. And that's one of the important aspects of regenerative. You know, organic has been somewhat diluted because a large scale monoculture farm that might be 2 square miles can technically be certified organic.
Yeah.
But by definition, regenerative will never be able to be used to describe anything that is a large-scale monoculture standing. Now, yes, we do monoculture subplots, but when it's considered as part of a larger landscape approach that it is defined as regenerative and includes all these, you know, indicators of soil health and the community and all of the other elements that come together in both the environmental and social landscape, then I think that that's the way to approach it. It's not easy because it has, you know, a lot of input costs that you have to take into consideration and changed patterns of behavior. But at a certain point, it can then become the default norm. We just have to get there, you know, and lead by example.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Tim, we're over to you. Are you able to unmute yourself? Yeah.
Hi, Hugh. If you feel so moved, share that story of I forget the gentleman's name, the older gentleman that you met regarding cotton in Haiti and his initial reaction to you and Timothy when you first approached him. It's very symbolic, I think, of the greater forces, the greater unseen forces working behind the scene here.
Tim is my brother, so he's heard a lot of the stories. Well, Rémulo Levier, we approached him because we knew that he had been, you know, previously Minister of Agriculture in Haiti. He had introduced the varieties of cotton that were most common between the mid-1950s and up until the time cotton left the country. And we approached him and we said, you know, we'd like to bring cotton back. And he said, I don't think it can work because I don't think that, you know, there's a way to get past the kind of the resistance that people would have to this. But we went with him out to meet a bunch of farmers in the rural area near Gonaive. And what was interesting was several of them recognized him, you know, because he's a fairly well-known figure in Haiti, even though he's advanced in years. And the farmers were so excited about the possibility of beginning to grow cotton again. And then we had a very interesting thing happen when we had our first harvest and we had ginned the cotton and put it into bales. We loaded it into a truck. It was a 2 years ago now, and we were driving it to the capital to put on a ship to send to the United States, to Timberland. And every time the truck stopped, a crowd would gather, and they didn't know what was going on, but they saw these big white bales, and then there were whispers, "Is that cotton?" And people were coming up and touching it to make sure it was real. Because it had been the 4th largest agricultural export from Haiti, and such a huge part of the culture. And the fact that we were able to bring it back, represented a real milestone. Is that the particular story you were thinking of, Tim? I may have forgotten one.
Well, I think there was one gentleman in particular that you approached who said he had been waiting for someone.
Oh, you're
to
right.
come. That
Oh,
one.
sorry, yes. So Ramilo, who was, I think, 92 when we met him, basically said, "I've been staying alive for you guys to show up, and thank goodness you're here because I'm 92. I forgot that, Tim. Thank you. He knew, he had the institutional, the cultural, the Haiti knowledge of cotton really in his head, and so he was one of the co-authors of our feasibility study. You're right, I'd forgotten about that, Tim. Thank you. So then we started sending him care packages. We thought, got to keep this man alive. And he's still alive to this day. I'm about to contact him to be able to get the shoe size so I can send him one of the first shoes made with Haiti cotton coming out of the Timberland factory.
Okay, wonderful. And I had a question, and so did Ned, but I think I would love to switch and invite Tony Louis on to answer the question around how the comic book is resonating with the young people. Are you able to speak to us about that, Tony?
Yes, yes. And can you hear me?
Yeah, turn your camera on, Tony.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, let's try and see if the Wi-Fi works. It'd be wonderful. See you.
Yes. You guys see me?
Yes.
All right.
Looking very, I told Tony he can wear that hat and look cool. I would just look like an old guy in a hat.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, and congratulations again, Hugh. And so grateful and happy that I have you in my life because of you. There's so many things that happen, and on my professional life and even personal life. So the comic book of Tanama is doing very well, and I will present it on the 18th of April at Jane Wynn Farm. She has an ecological farm in Kiskov, in Port-au-Prince, in the city in Haiti. And so far, the reaction of the youth is very.
Oh, you turned your mic off.
No, I think I did. I was trying to mute someone else. I'm sorry about that.
Right.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, sorry about that, Tony.
So last year we launched the talent project in 2 schools. I was able to present it to 2 schools in Port-au-Prince, and it was, the kids loved it, and they were so happy because most of the time what they're watching on TV or their comic books, it's mostly foreign superheroes. So they're very much happy that they can finally have a Haitian superhero, and it's about tree planting. And I've been having so many invitations and people asking me for the comic book, and they are really aware of how tree planting is important in Haiti, and it couldn't go better.
People are asking Tony in the chat about maybe buying some books in Haiti. Our challenge is this: we have a supply here in New York State. We were not able to ship them down because of COVID. So we have a limited number that are in Haiti. But we are working on a project now to be able to print locally and do a second comic book, and by hopefully the end of this year, we will have 2 comic books in volume in Haiti. Now, other people are asking, I see, can they buy it online? Not yet. We have to get that set up, but we don't have a fulfillment center if anybody wants to volunteer to help with that. You know. Otherwise, basically, I'd be, my wife and I would be mailing them out from our house.
Well, and there's those digital readers now too that you can have people, buy and then.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, it's available for free online in Creole and English. And you go to the Tanama, it's a Tanama, TANAMA project, tanamaproject.org, and you can read it for free. We just want to get the hard copies out because it's very difficult in Haiti for kids to have access to digital things.
Right. But if one of you guys are in Haiti on April 18, you'll be able to have the book.
Now, also just to explain that Tony is now a global goodwill ambassador for Timberland, and on there's 2 days coming up, and we'll be sharing this in our newsletter. But on 2 days coming up, Tony's going to take over the worldwide Timberland Instagram account to talk about cotton in Haiti and some of his other projects, including Tanama. So he's a pretty important part of our outreach operation. And through him, I was able to get my first Instagram account.
Tony, tell us what the handle is for you and for Timberland so we can follow you.
Oh, on Instagram, it's Tony Louis. It's THONYLOUI. That's my Instagram account name, and it's Tony with a H, THONY and LOUI. And for Timberland, it's just Timberland.
Okay. We'll all be following you. How exciting!
Tanama too, please. She wants to be followed.
Oh! So Tanama has her own one.
Yes. Applies too. If you ask her any question.
Is that just at Tanama? TANAMA.
It's Tanama TANAMA.project. Yeah.
Great. I put those in the chat so that people can see them.
Thank you very much.
On Instagram right now. That's so exciting. Thank you. Wonderful collaborations. How are we doing, folks? We do have a question still. Yes, things are being recorded. The whole recording will be available as usual on the website, and Dawn can say more about that. And then we did have one more question, but we're 2 minutes to the end. How are you feeling?
We can go. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm here.
Okay, great.
People can sign off if they need to. I mean.
Sure. Okay, great. So Ned and I had a similar question. Ned was asking how you maintain and enhance soil fertility, presumably not NPK as used in industrial ag. And that was a question I had. Like, I know I've heard that cotton is a very, nutrient hungry, pest prone, problematic crop. And so how do you decide the trade-offs, thinking about food security and also the need for additional income for smallholder farmers? And then tied with that, I was thinking about, it sounds like from this tree species you were speaking of, you're thinking not just trees as conservation, but trees as, ecological, for their ecological services, but also for the communities to manage and get products from also. So those were that sums up, I think, something that Ned and I had questions around.
Well, let me start off with the second one. We're starting to look now at, we're purchasing 2 tracts of land where we're going to be establishing a denser forest. And we want to set up micro enterprise projects with smallholder farmers to be able to then make a living from the forest. So, small scale jam production or things like that, where the forest has a value, because it's helping for the livelihoods of local farmers. Then in terms of soil, first of all, one of the most important things is farmers in Haiti have been organic by default. And so you're not having to deal with a lot of residual chemicals in the land. That doesn't mean that there's been, particularly effective agricultural practices, but by and large, unless when USAID shows up, don't get me started, with lots of cash, and then they say, oh, you could grow some hybrids, but that'll of course take fertilizers. Here's some fertilizers. And then they leave after a year because their funding has run out, and the farmers are left with not being able to afford to buy the more expensive hybrid crops, nor are they able to afford the fertilizers. So in a nutshell, Haiti is littered with the dead carcasses of agricultural projects that did not understand that you need to stay within the framework of organic agriculture. I know not everyone will agree with me. But you start off then with the good news that Haitian smallholder farmers are used to organic agriculture. They just didn't call it that. So then you have to introduce new practices. For example, composting. So every one of our tree nurseries has a demonstration compost pile. And then you have to get farmers understanding that, in order to enhance the compost, you need, if you can get it, you need animal waste. And how do you do that? And what's the mixing? How much water do you need in the compost pile? How high should the compost pile? And if you've got a tall one, how wide should the hole at the top be to put the water in? What's the size of the pole that goes down? All of the technical details that you have to translate. So compost is extremely important. Then, minimum tilling. And then there's other agricultural practices that have kind of had, it's like bad practices creep in over time, and you have to then gradually take them back out. For example, the use of irrigation. There's been a tendency over the years to have small plots, which is the system in Haiti, small plot agriculture, but then they flood the entire plot. And that means that you lose, and you've planted the seeds on the flat soil and this little ridge, and they flood that little square plot. Well, you can lose up to 30% of the seeds for lack of germination. But if you go back to the old system, where it looked like a piece of exaggerated corduroy, little ridges, and the water, you let it in and it goes between the ridges, and the seeds get put in at the top of the ridge, and you can get close to 95%, 98% germination, because there's no flooding of the actual seed. And all of those things start to help to improve soil over time. Now, when it comes to cotton, everything is done organically. So we use, at the moment, we're able to use natural systems of pesticides because we don't have any boll weevil yet in Haiti. We know it will come. At that point, we're going to be using pheromone strips to attract them, which is acceptable within organic agriculture. I don't know if you know, anyway, that's more technical. But at the moment, what we do is that around every field, we plant okra. Now, okra then has a flower that looks sort of like the flower of cotton, but it comes out earlier. So the insects fly in thinking, oh, we're going to nose dive into this field and do our business. They stop at the okra, get busy there, and it helps to protect the cotton. Now, we have just made an agreement with, so I know you ask a question and it pushes a button in me, and I'm sorry, I can't help it. But we have a very exciting new development where there's a solar-powered harvester that's been developed in Brazil. It's a backpack-operated thing, and solar batteries, and it's sort of like a leaf blower in reverse. And you use that to harvest the cotton. Amazing, because it's I've done this myself. they're prickly, it's, you know, so we're now going to be introducing this later this year. The first ever in the world solar powered backpack harvester. But wouldn't you know it, you can use the same thing to suck off the insects. Who knew? And it and it's completely sustainable. So we're making a modest investment in this company in Brazil because they need some help to get it up to standards for manufacture. But we're very excited about that because then again, you know, all of these things help to lower what you have to use to grow the crops. Last thing on cotton, because we control this, all the seed source of the cotton, we can make sure that no farmer grows more than half their land on with cotton in any given season. Then they rotate, and then we use legumes and others to replenish the soil. You know, there's always trade-offs, but at least we're looking at how to best manage those to preserve the environment.
Fantastic. Wow. And we just found out that Tanama in Taino means butterfly.
Yes.
So there's also a connection to the indigenous culture.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Well, and you know, another very interesting thing that Tony and I have only recently discovered, that is that when Mr. Columbus arrived as a conquistador, or whatever the appropriate term now is for somebody coming in to basically steal everything, and he landed in Haiti in 1492, the local Taino people had been harvesting wild cotton for a century and had been weaving their own cotton cloth. And Columbus and his cohorts took back souvenirs from the island of Hispaniola, which is now both Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And there are 2 remaining examples of the souvenirs they took back, both made with cotton, both in European museums, and they should be repatriated. I'm sure you got them, you know, using the perfect system, but you should not keep them. Hello. Anyway, again, I digress.
Well, that was a question I had too, was did cotton fall out of cultivation because it was a crop used for colonizing? Is that why, or was there another reason?
No, because when Haiti became independent in 1804, cotton continued to be an important export, and it maintained that up until the late 1980s. And that was at the peak of the Duvalier regime. And there were, trade barriers and things as part of the, penalizing the Duvaliers, which was justified. But it meant that, the smallholder farmers of Haiti, who had nothing to do with Duvalier, were unfortunately one of the fallouts from that. So cotton lost its value because it lost a market. And then it just disappeared totally.